Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Guardian columnist Zoe Williams and the Daily Mail's Whitehall editor Claire Ellicott. Welcome and great to see both of you. So as ever, let's check out the front pages, shall we? Starting with the Financial Times. And ahead of the US-Russia summit on Ukraine, on Friday, the FT carries President Donald Trump's warning of very severe consequences if Vladimir Putin refuses to end the war. Well, that phrase, severe consequences, also featuring on the front of tomorrow's Guardian. The Times, too, has that warning from Trump to Putin on the eve of those talks in Alaska. Well, the eve for Thursday's paper. Another warning in the eye, this time from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who's cautioned Mr. Trump that Putin may be bluffing if he expresses a desire to resolve the conflict. The Metro, meanwhile, leads with the message to Putin from today's meeting of European leaders in Berlin: there will be no surrender. The Telegraph suggests that Trump will offer Putin access to valuable minerals in Ukraine and Alaska in an attempt to make a deal. News that the brother of the Manchester Arena bomber has been charged with 3 counts of attempted murder while in prison is the top story for the Daily Mirror. The Express leads with Policing Minister Dame Diana Johnson, who reportedly suggested shopkeepers shouldn't put high-value items at the front of their stores in case they get stolen. The Daily Mail reports on what it calls a BBC climb down and apology to the former Cabinet Minister Robert Jenrick after he was attacked on Radio 4 over an article he wrote for the paper. And finally, The Star tells us that Donald Trump is planning to hold UFC fights on the White House lawn to celebrate America's 250th anniversary. So Zoe Williams and Claire Ellicott are here. In other matters for Donald Trump, dominating the newspapers, including front page of The Guardian, for example, is Friday. It's all about Friday now, and it was a drip feed of information, including this is meeting number 1. He wants very rapidly to be meeting number 2, Putin, Zelensky, possibly Trump if they invite me, kind of thing.
So he's caved somewhat, and actually Trump is all over the place. So sometimes, initially, he was perfectly happy to go into bilateral talks just with himself and Putin, which is kind of a crazy idea, given that he was talking about swap for swap territory when the Ukrainians don't have any Russian territory. Then, obviously following pressure from European leaders, he's now saying he'll have the first talks, and then very quickly they'll have the second talks, which will then include Zelensky. Later on, after this quote that The Guardian uses from him to Washington journalists, he says, actually, the first meeting is just teeing up the second meeting, and the second meeting is the main event. But then in the same press conference, he says, except we might not need to have the second meeting. So I think the reason everybody's freaking out, and I haven't really seen this rendered as freaking out in any of the front pages, is that Trump isn't making a huge amount of sense. Whether he's saying that Alaska is part of Russia, or he's saying there's going to be 1 meeting, 2 meetings, or 3 meetings, he's not holding a consistent line. So this idea that people are kind of really clinging on to, whether that's the European leaders or the front pages, that Trump will, A, have these severe consequences if Russia doesn't do what he wants, and B, stick to them the day after. I think a lot of people are worried that it's for the birds.
Yes, and we haven't even got to the idea of a minerals deal, which we'll come to shortly. But many commentators suggesting that Putin's already won. You know, he's out of the cold, out of isolation. He's on American soil, meeting the US president, Europe, meanwhile, is flapping around, excluded and looking inconsequential. So this is win-win for the Russian leader.
I think the really big thing about Trump and Putin meeting is actually that Russia has been brought in from the cold, because they've been excluded for so long from international meetings and agreements. And this is a big signal to the world that Putin's back in the frame. Donald Trump, I think, thinks can get some sort of deal across the line. I think this meeting in Alaska on Friday will be Donald Trump listening to Putin's terms. Yeah. And it's really hard to see how that ends up in a favourable position for Ukraine. And I do wonder today, there's been so much diplomacy. There have been all these calls, Keir Starmer spent hours on calls, all the European leaders we've had press conferences. But I wonder how much has been achieved, because as Zoe was saying, it's just those 2 men in the room at the end of the day, and we do not know what's going to take place. And we don't know what Trump's negotiating tactics are going to
Also,
be.
there's that chilling thing that whenever Trump comes out of any meeting with Putin, he's always full of bluster, and Putin's always very quiet, and it always goes Russia's way. And it is, you know, the FT calls Putin a wily negotiator. I don't really think that's a meaningful thing to say in modern diplomacy. It's not that Putin somehow comes up with a kind of verbal formulations that bests his foes. It's just that Trump does not concentrate and doesn't have a line.
Yeah, people talk about the details man of Putin, who has lived and breathed this for the last 2 decades, poring over maps, working out what he can take and when. Zelensky's voice does make the front of the eye, though. He travelled to Berlin in Germany today alongside Chancellor Merz. They had this virtual meeting. We caught a glimpse of it. I don't know if you've got the pictures, actually, of, you know, Sir Keir Starmer. Downing Street released some of them of Sir Keir Starmer making his pitch, if you like. Again, the message is that there should be no deal about Ukraine without Ukraine in the room. Protect Ukraine from bluffing Putin, Zelensky urges Trump. You know, he does not trust Putin as far as he could, you know.
Of course.
And Zelensky he hasn't had and never has had any trouble persuading his European allies of his case. But A, because it's so strong, B, because most European leaders recognise that Ukraine is fighting the good fight. You know, if Ukraine had just surrendered, then things might be looking much worse for the surrounding countries. So he can always get them on side and he can always muster them to say a thing. But whether they're meeting the moment in terms of how much trust they have in the international order and how much trust they have in Trump, that's what Zelensky's freaking out about. And I don't blame him one bit.
Yes, well, Trump scored it a 10, this meeting, virtual meeting. And Zelensky's top line was really the need for a ceasefire. But the ceasefire on the current map, which could eventually become a de facto map of what's given up, which is the danger, really, of the next steps in this process.
Of course, and we all saw how rattled Zelensky looked today. He didn't look happy, and it will be well aware that everything is resting on this meeting, and actually how much influence does he have? We all watched that awful, torturous meeting between Trump, Vance and Zelensky in the White House and squirmed as we watched it. Trump is not on his side. The very idea that they'll want Trump at the negotiating table if there is a kind of three-way meeting with Putin, Zelensky. Trump is not on Zelensky's side. He was criticising him just the other day. And if you just have to feel for Zelensky, because, as Zoe was saying, he's really made the case in Europe. Europe has, by and large, accepted it and sent him more and more weapons to try to help, not least because that's a guarantee of European security, because of Russia that takes Ukraine is emboldened and would pose a threat to the rest of us. But also because Zelensky, you know, he has won people's hearts and minds, but there's a kind of cultural disconnect with America. We don't understand almost why America aren't supporting Ukraine, but they don't. And what happens on Friday is...
But what did you make of Vance saying we're going to, you know, when he was speaking to the American troops in Gloucestershire, I think, saying we're going to take on the bad guys? And it's like, for all of Europeans, we assume he means Putin, but there's no sign in his bearing that he actually means Putin.
It's because of you that we can, you know, make a response.
And, you know, it's because of you that we can vanquish the bad guys. It's like, which bad guys does he mean? Yeah. You would not be surprised to wake up one morning and find that he means Zelensky.
The FT pictures then, Zelensky with the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz there as well. Again, that line of very severe consequences. The French President Emmanuel Macron said there had been no serious discussion about Ukrainian territorial concessions, stressing that Trump had very clearly stated his objective of reaching a ceasefire. That is possibly a relief to people. A listening exercise is how this was billed yesterday. Possibly this will deliver nothing substantive, and it is, in a sense, for show. I mean, Donald Trump boasting today, I've solved 5 or 6 wars. You know, we know his ambition is the Nobel Peace Prize, or to save the thousands of deaths, as he puts it, in Ukraine. I'm just here to sort it out. It wouldn't have happened on my watch. Is it simply a case of to be seen to be doing something?
Well, it's really hard to see what Russia would get out of a ceasefire if there was nothing else attached. But one of the things that the European leaders keep bringing home is that you can't cede territory that was taken in an aggressive act. You know, perhaps down the line, when wars have been raging and territory has swapped hands, maybe that's a kind of treaty deal. But you cannot. It goes against the principles of if there are any left, of the international order, to say, OK, Russia took it, now it's Russia's. It just can't happen. So they're still very much, they're on the kind of last century's operating system, and they don't know what to do with the new information.
And it's in Trump's interest, it's in Putin's interest to continue this, because Russia's making gains, Russia is progressing, and he's trying to secure as much territory as possible before we get to it.
Yeah. Well, let's go to the Daily Telegraph, which I found truly fascinating. Certainly on the wires, it dropped that there had been a licence bid for transactions for Alaska on Friday. Then the Daily Telegraph drops, which says Trump is to offer Putin a minerals deal for peace. The US president armed with money-making opportunities, it says, to encourage Russia to end the Ukrainian war. The suggestion is that Donald Trump is preparing to offer Vladimir Putin access to rare earth minerals to incentivise him to end the war. He'll arrive at the meeting armed with a number of money-making opportunities for President Putin, including opening up Alaska's natural resources to Moscow and lifting some of the American sanctions on Russia's aviation industry. This is the European Union plans its 19th sanctions against Russia, and Trump, threatened secondary sanctions, which at the moment he's put on India. Proposals include giving Putin access to the rare earth minerals in the Ukrainian territories currently occupied by Russia. Are those his to give away, one wonders? Scott Bessent, US Treasury Secretary, understood to be among administration figures briefing Mr. Trump ahead of his meeting with Putin in Anchorage. I mean, this all sounds interesting, but kind of
it sounds
dodgy,
mental. It sounds mental, right?
Yeah.
But then if you think that was part of that really horrible meeting that you described with Zelensky, was that the Americans were trying to concoct a deal even back then in February, where a Ukrainian journalist described it as pay the Americans first, feed your children later. They were trying to make military aid contingent upon the surrender of Ukrainian mineral rights to American interests. And that kind of floundered because it was a ridiculous idea and nobody was going to say yes to it. But it does seem to have reared its head again. There's no indication of why Zelensky would say yes to it, A. B, the whole Alaska thing, I think, is a red herring way to just inflame his own environmental lobby, because obviously the main impediment to rare earth metals mining in Alaska is the environmentalists don't want it. So
well, I mean, all I can think of is it's the carrot, the economic opportunities, against the stick of very severe consequences. Very quickly, Claire, just a thought on...
Donald Trump's a businessman, isn't he? He wants to do a deal. And
transactional one as well, but...
Yeah, and he has, as Zoe was saying, had his eyes on minerals for a long time, striking a mineral deal with Ukraine in order to pay for the weapons that he'd sent them.
And if you don't achieve a ceasefire, you achieve something you can say in a press conference afterwards, don't you? But there we are. We'll see. Anyway, we've got lots to pack in, including a story from you, Claire, in the Daily Mail. The BBC has been forced to pull a flagship segment where a guest called a former cabinet minister a xenophobe. We will talk more about that in just a moment.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
How are
are you feeling?
I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Anybody else?
Should the Defence Secretary and the Vice...
Wait, what country are you
from? The UK.
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down. As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Sky News, get the full story first. Free wherever you get your news. Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace. The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland. Catholics and Protestants now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19, religion's nothing.
Sky News, the full story first.
Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety.
We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming.
I'm Deborah Hames, Sky Security and Defence Editor.
Should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Zoe Williams and Claire Ellicott. Welcome back to both of you. Claire, your story, Daily Mail, BBC climbing down over what they've described as a xenophobe slur on Robert Jenrick. Take it away.
Yes, so the Mail on Sunday splashed some Robert Jenrick comments. He was talking about people coming over on boats, illegal migrants, and how he worried for his daughter's safety. We've seen a lot of migrant protests outside asylum hotels across the country. And following that, there was a Thought for the Day on the Today programme this morning in which they had a guest on who's called Dr. Krish Kandia, who is an author and he runs a refugee charity. And he basically accused Robert Jenrick of stoking fear and of being xenophobic. So I think Jenrick complained, and a few news outlets picked this up, and the BBC immediately pulled the Today programme and said that they were going to edit it and offered a full apology to Robert Jenrick, which is quite a dramatic thing to do. And Robert Jenrick tweeted after saying it's not racist to worry about your children's safety.
I mean, I'd like to defend Thought for the Day just for a second, because actually saying I worry for my daughter's safety, so kind of explicitly suggesting that there's kind of some sexual threat from these people, because why is it your daughter's, not your son's?
He's got 3 daughters, but yeah.
B, explicitly suggesting that migrants are more kind of predatory than non-migrants, which is actually xenophobic. I mean, it is. But what's interesting...
Are you getting us in trouble here, Zoe?
What's interesting, I think, is how rarely you ever hear anybody say anything like at all controversial on Talk for the Day, and how weird that is that we have enshrined in public sector broadcasting these 3.5 minutes of thought which don't actually involve any difficult thoughts.
I mean, they're sort of meant to be religious thoughts about...
So Mr Jenrick said illegal migration is obviously fuelling crime and the public are right to be concerned about it. It's extremely disappointing the BBC thought it was acceptable to smear millions of worried citizens as xenophobic for their completely understandable fears about undocumented men entering illegally. Well, the BBC said, I've concluded that while its reflection on fear in society from a faith perspective is broadly in line with the expectations of Thought for the Day, some of the language it used went beyond that. I've asked for the 2 references to xenophobia to be edited from the programme on BBC Sounds. Please accept my apology for their original inclusion. So there we go. I'm going to move on if you don't mind. Got 2 more stories back in mind. I'm so sorry. Which is shoplifting. Zoe.
OK, so... I mean, everybody's very exercised about shoplifting, and here is one thing when I have to admit that it does seem to be a thing. Numbers are up 20% just since this government came in, and even before this government came in, shoplifting figures were astronomical. The policing minister has said that it would help if you didn't put the expensive stuff at the front of the shop, but I have some personal experience of this because, not from shoplifting myself, I was in a co-op. And obviously the really expensive stuff is in the little cabins that they're in and you can't get into it. But a guy next to me crawled through the service hatch, ejected the serving lady, let his friends in. They all spent like 3 or 4 or maybe 5 minutes emptying the place of every cigarette, every bottle of spirits in there.
And you were
and we were all
of the day, or?
It was a Sunday at like midday. Oh my God. And we were all watching, kind of didn't know. I mean, there was no way I was going to intercept them, but we didn't know whether to film it or I don't know, make a human chain. It was really surreal. And then they just vanished. And the police, by the time the police got there, I mean, no offence to the police do have a fast response time, but it's really unclear what they could actually do anyway, you know.
OK. Golly. Zoe and Claire, thank you very much indeed. I thought I had a bad experience today when our garden took a direct hit from lightning and I thought the windows were going to be blown out. Anyway, let's see what the weather's shaping up like. Personal stories abound here.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Staying fairly settled, very warm over the next few days, although most places won't be as hot as recently. Another muggy but mostly fine start tomorrow. A few showers around, possibly torrential, thundery again over the Northern Isles. Fog in places too, misty cloud affecting some northeastern and western coastal communities. They'll burn back to the coast during the morning, leaving sunny spells, foremost cloudier though than recently.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Hear that whistle and that crunch. We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian armoury.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.